The federal election is over. This is the third in our election series. We've already talked about psychology, mental health in the federal election and the party platforms. Now we are going to talk about the results. My name is Eric Bowman. I'm the communications specialist at the Canadian Psychological Association, and this is Mindful. Twice now, we've spoken to Glenn Brimacombe, the CPA's Director of Policy and Public Affairs, about the federal election. In the lead-up, now we are going to speak to him in the aftermath. Glenn, welcome. Thank you for being back.
Eric, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
All right, so first impressions. The federal election has ended. Looks at the moment, we are speaking on Tuesday afternoon. It looks like a Liberal minority, but we are still not 100% certain where it's going to end up. What are your first thoughts?
Wow. First impressions are everything has changed and nothing has changed. And what I mean by that is that we look like we're in a minority government again, completely different complexion, different numbers, different proportion of the Liberal Party in terms of seat versus the Conservatives bloc and NDP. Surprisingly, at least in my eyes, we have two leaders that were unelected, did not win their riding, which brings a level of complexity, I think, to where we go from here. So what it leaves us with is a minority government where the Liberal Party is going to have to figure out who are they going to dance with. How are they going to get, depending on the issue that is before the House, to a majority at 172 votes to move their agenda or agendas forward. So it'll be interesting to see if Prime Minister Carney moves towards managing their agenda, which is outlined in the platform document, on an issue-by-issue basis with each political party and effectively determining where each party is in support of the Liberal Party that is before the House. Or does he look at déjà vu all over again with a supply and confidence agreement with the NDP, which is leaderless, as I previously mentioned.
Right.
And again, you're catching me 12, 14 hours after, we saw the semifinal results, knowing that the final count will be by the end of today. It just looks like that they may not be moving in that kind of direction, which might be viewed as somewhat Trudeau-esque, if you know what I mean.
I don't know what you mean.
So when I say Trudeau-esque in the sense that there was a formal supply and confidence agreement that was negotiated between Prime Minister Trudeau and Mr. Singh.
Right.
So in this case, what you might see is something much more informal in terms of the way that the Liberal government looks for support across the aisle at all of the other political parties, depending on the issue at play, as opposed to some sort of formal accord.
And the tightness of it, even if it is a minority government and it looks like it might be the closeness, right? They need only the 4 votes to get to the majority. So that means any one of the other parties could, except the Green, I suppose, could shift the balance of power on any individual vote. Which of the other parties is more likely to align with the Liberals on the subject we've been talking about, which is mental health?
So that's a great question. So let me first say, when you look at the share of the vote, what's really interesting is between the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party, Canadians selected them 85% of the total vote share that is out there.
Right.
That is incredibly concentrated, where you have the Liberals at 43.5% and the Conservatives at 41.4%. So exceptionally close at the national level, knowing that when you look across the provinces, there's tremendous variation in terms of how the vote actually rolls out. Now, saying that, to your question, it depends on the issues in the sense that when I look at the platforms and I have read their commitments in the mental health, substance use health space, there's different philosophical approaches that each party is bringing to the table. And what I mean by that, for example, is, and I'll go through each, but I'll start with the Bloc Québécois. And the Bloc Québécois, as you know, is a traditional separatist party whose view effectively is healthcare is a provincial jurisdictional issue. Give us federal dollars that we are entitled to, and don't bother us. We know what we're doing. Let us address our issues. Just make sure that the check is properly addressed and signed by the president of the Treasury Board, and we will get the job done in terms of making sure that Quebecers get the health care that they need. So that's a more difficult road for the Liberals to hoe, because the Bloc Québécois won't necessarily be looking to partner with them on any national initiative in the mental health, substance use health space. Then I look at the NDP, and their platform is closer to the Liberal Party. It's far from identical, but it certainly identifies key investments in the mental health and substance use health space that could be aligned depending on the relative focus that the Liberal Party wants to put on expanding publicly funded access to mental health services. And they talk about psychotherapy and counseling in particular, as does the NDP. The NDP really has focused on, can we provide, I would call it gap insurance in the public system. That is, for Canadians who do not have any form of employer-based insurance to cover psychological services, then the public insurance system should kick in to make sure that they are covered. So there's an opportunity there, in addition to some of the investments in terms of trying to improve access for those that are suffering from substance use health issues. So there is some alignment there where the NDP and the Liberals perhaps could get into a very comfortable tango and move forward in terms of shared policy objectives. The Conservatives, a little different in the sense that the Conservatives really didn't make any substantial commitments on the mental health side in their platform, which in my view was a disappointment and was a significant deviation from what they promised in the previous election.
Right.
Where they made substantial promises in terms of what they were going to put on the table. And in particular, they were talking about a Canada Mental Health Action Plan. So that's nowhere in their literature, but they do talk quite a bit about substance use health and expanding treatment capacity. And that's one piece perhaps where they may align with the Liberal government. They don't necessarily align on the harm reduction side, on the prevention and promotion side. But on the treatment side, they might align. But there might be more capital P political issues in the way that would allow for any kind of synchronicity from a policy point of view between the Liberals and the Conservatives.
And you mentioned, how disappointing it was that there was nothing about mental health in the Conservative platform this time. That platform also got put out really late in the game.
Yeah, you're right. And quite frankly, most platforms were put out just after the two public debates, which in a sense is unfortunate because you couldn't integrate some of their thinking and the financial/fiscal framework that each party was putting into place in terms of where they were looking to invest, where they're looking possibly to cut, and the overall debt deficit picture that they were putting in place over the next 3 to 5 years. So it is. I don't just look at the Conservatives and see that as an issue. Quite frankly, I think it cuts across all the parties. Where in the future, I don't know if you can make this more upfront or make sure that the parties are releasing further out from the election date and perhaps further out from debates, just allowing for a better sharing of information and discussion and questioning of some of their assumptions and the numbers that are being put in the platforms and what they're being prepared to commit to. Because some of the numbers, people are saying they don't add up. They don't make sense. I don't understand how you're getting there. And unfortunately, just given the closeness of the release of the platforms after the debate to our election date itself, it makes it really difficult to get into that level of discussion. And that's assuming many Canadians probably don't want to get into the details, but there are some of us who are looking very hard at the numbers and the kinds of commitments that they're making. Right.
And you are one who wants to get into the details, and I am one who is a cynic. And so I think that the reason that platforms get released that late in the game is so that people can't dig into the numbers and make it an issue before Election Day actually rolls around. It would strike me that if you have a well-costed, well-thought-out, well-balanced platform where the numbers all add up, that you'd want to release that earlier. Is there a danger in doing that?
I suppose there is, and you're probably right that most Canadians don't want to get into the weeds. They live very busy lives. They have other things going on. They just want to see the bigger picture. And this election, in my mind anyhow, and other people can certainly disagree with me on this one, but it really boiled down to Canadians' perception of the leaders and their ability to trust the leadership to navigate this country and our futures through very uncertain economic times. So, and I think that was more of a gut check for many Canadians, that did they think Mr. Polievre, Mr. Singh, or Mr. Carney could actually get us from point A to point B in roiling political waters where we're looking down south and seeing a president that is zigging and zagging. I think I've said that before on your
yes
on one of the earlier podcasts, that is moving in very unanticipated ways and making it very difficult to ensure that there's stability in terms of how this country moves forward.
You mentioned that the platforms were released after the debates. Last time we spoke on this podcast, we spoke about the debates, and they were coming up. They hadn't yet happened. They have since happened in the interim, and I was struck because I remember speculating that maybe Jagmeet Singh would bring up healthcare and mental health and force it into the forefront as an issue. He brought up healthcare quite a lot, not so much mental health. It didn't seem to work out very well for him in the end. Is that something that plays in the minds of other politicians, that he went so hard on healthcare in the debate, and then the result that the NDP got was less than stellar? Is that something that people hang on to?
I think a couple of things. One is that it was very telling that the debate commission did not identify healthcare as a specific thematic issue for either the French or English debate. And I was very disappointed to hear that. Saying that, when you look at the recent public polling on the priorities that Canadians were identifying, healthcare, which is generally a top 3 public policy priority issue for Canadians, had fallen down to 5th.
Right.
Which is in some ways not surprising given the fact that this was an economics election. This was an election around affordability, around jobs, around trade and tariffs. So as much as I would have liked to have seen as a policy analyst and someone who has spent my career focusing around health, I would have liked to have seen much more of a focus on what each party is going to do to ensure that we can get the care that we need. It just didn't happen.
You mentioned too that we've got Trump zigging and zagging and doing crazy things all the time, which makes it so difficult for our elected leaders to respond or to even anticipate what's going to happen next. And it strikes me though, all right, I'm going to do a weird name drop thing here, okay? Years and years ago, right before the first election of Justin Trudeau, I managed to get an interview with Tommy Chong, Cheech and Chong, and he was saying, and he was talking about the Canadian election that was coming up, and he was saying, Canada always seems to do the thing where they see what the Americans have elected and then go, hey, we got one of those, and then we'll elect that guy too. And he took me back through some history, and he was not entirely wrong, right? Reagan led to Mulrooney and, these sort of things. And that sort of pattern is held true until Donald Trump. And it strikes me that the thing we took this time is like, oh, we don't really want another Trump, but we do like the two-party system. Why don't we go with that? And it ended up becoming a thing where, right, most of the Liberal votes came from the NDP, and I feel like it was more a referendum on the Conservatives, who had such a monumental lead, really, 8-10 weeks ago, and it looked like a foregone conclusion, and it looked like people said, oh, I'm more scared about that than I am about voting the way that I otherwise would or have in previous elections.
It's really interesting. I think in this instance, you're right, that people did not want to see the mirror image of Trump leading this country. In fact, they wanted to see the exact opposite. Someone with strength, character, experience, and knowledge. And I think that's what you're getting with Mr. Carney. The other piece is that there still is a tremendous amount of angst out there about where to from here. And like you said, knowing that the NDP vote largely collapsed, and to a certain extent in Quebec, the Bloc Québécois lost a significant amount of support to the Liberals. People are looking for stability and safety in a world where it is rapidly changing. Not only the United States, you look to the European Union, you look to Asia, you look to the Ukraine and Russia, there's a lot of activities going on that aren't necessarily friendly to this country. So I think this is where we need, and whether you supported Mr. Polievre, who was offering up a quote-unquote agenda of change. And I would say so was Mr. Carney, except he was framing it in the context of leadership and everything that flows through leadership. They were both putting on the table significant change. And it'll be interesting to see, knowing that it feels like we're moving into the tips of a soft recession. Let's hope it's soft. How is this country going to navigate extremely choppy waters? We haven't seen inflation numbers that are coming down the pike. We will likely see, and I say with hesitation, see some rise in unemployment, just given the impact of tariffs. And probably more importantly, the fact that even with Trump's 90-day delay, he's having a significant chilling effect on business investment in this country.
Right.
Which will hamper employment growth over the medium to long term. So there's a lot to be concerned about, where Canadians really are looking to batten down the hatches. Who can I trust, and who can lead this country safely through very, very difficult times that seem to be coming our way?
And a lot of that uncertainty and a lot of that anxiety and trepidation does lead to some mental health challenges. How do we go forward? How do you go forward in lobbying for the mental health changes we want to see now?
Well, what's interesting, too, is that just given everything I just said about roiling economic waters and tremendous instability that is coming our way, all the more reason to make sure that we focus on our mental health. That our first wealth is mental health. There is no health without mental health. And I'm hoping that even from an economic standpoint, making sure that we are healthy, both physically and mentally, is to our advantage to make sure that we have a highly adaptive, prosperous, productive, and robust economy. So from that standpoint, the context, knowing that economics is the prism, for the most part, that we seem to be looking at many different issues in terms of moving forward, the issues around mental health and substance use health fit within that context. And they're very legitimate. And all the more reason to make sure that governments understand that there's a really important component to invest in our mental health. Not only to make sure that you and I are productive citizens and fulfill our potential as individuals, but more importantly, or equally importantly, to make sure that we can be productive, that we can be adaptive, and that we can be innovative in terms of our future and what that means in terms of economic growth and prosperity.
Mark Carney obviously had the economic bona fides going into this election. People trusted him in that space. Does he have that same view, do you think, that mental health is so intrinsically tied to our economic fortunes?
That's a really good question that I'm not in a position to answer yet. I've talked to some of the people around Mr. Carney. They understand the issue. They have talked about it in their platform. So when you look at their platform, they do talk about investing $600 million in a youth mental health fund in perpetuity. They do talk about providing $500 million through the emergency treatment fund to deal with substance use health issues. They recognize the need to substantially invest in affordable housing and supportive housing and shelters. So there are elements there that are aligned and fit in the bigger context around impacting, hopefully positively impacting, the mental health and substance use health of Canadians. Saying that, there are a couple of pieces that are missing. So when I look at the whole issue that the Canadian Psychological Association and the Canadian Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health have been fighting for around mental health parity and the need for new federal legislation, a companion piece to the Canada Health Act, that fully recognizes the value of expanding publicly insured access to mental health and substance use health care. So effectively, it is a companion piece to physical health, which is largely defined in the context of the Canada Health Act, and we create a companion piece of legislation that recognizes the symmetry between mental health and physical health. That's not there. That's something we will continue to push for. And one of the interesting features is that if the Liberal Party looks to align with the New Democratic Party, the NDP is the one party that in the last session of Parliament introduced an amendment to the Canada Health Act to do just that.
Right.
To create mental health parity and substance use health parity. So there may be an opportunity there. There may be some synergy in terms of the NDP working closely with the Liberal Party, very similar to the way they leveraged pharmacare and dental care. Perhaps this time, if you believe in threes, that maybe this is the third policy issue for the NDP to push is mental health parity.
And how does your job change now as a result of the election? A newly elected government, you're going to go and talk to some people. Do you talk to the NDP and tell them, hey, keep this top of mind, this thing that you wanted to do is terrific, push the Liberals on it? Do you talk more to the Liberals because now they're the ones in power making the bulk of the decisions? Or is it still a go and see whoever's willing to talk to you sort of approach?
I think it's more ecumenical. Knowing that we're in a minority government and things could change rather quickly. The average lifespan of a minority government is about 18 months historically.
Right.
So things can change. Today's backbencher could be tomorrow's Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. So we understand that, and we talk to all political parties about our issues. The way that we frame our issues is we are nonpartisan. And what we are trying to do is provide the best public policy advice that is evidence-informed and evidence-based to make sure that Canadians have ready access to evidence-based mental health and substance use healthcare. So that's our kind of foundational approach to the way that we deal with parliamentarians, senators, and officials. We will talk to all political parties. We will engage all of them on the issues because we know that you never know in 18 months where things may be. It might have been different if it had been a majority government, because then you have a government that will be in power for 4 to 5 years.
Right.
And it's a more established power structure in a sense that you can go talk to those that are making decisions without having to worry about engaging other political parties. Doesn't mean you're not talking to the other political parties or the shadow critics or the policy people around them to make sure that they understand what we're trying to get if government is showing some reluctance in supporting our recommendations. So, no, we're trying to be as ecumenical as we can be, and we will happily and continue as we have, along with Dr. Vada Bleeker and Dr. Madden, continue to engage and discuss the policy views of the association, of the profession, with all politicians.
And when you say all politicians, do you get a chance to talk to the Bloc? It seems like that's sort of an insular thing. Is that more the province of L'Ordre des Psychologues de Québec, or is that, do you get to talk to Bloc MPs on the Hill as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. They're not insular at all, actually, in the political process in Ottawa. They're very accessible, and they want to hear what we have to say. Now, while they have a different philosophical point of departure in terms of the issues and recognizing that they think that health is provincial, full stop, and the only role that the federal government has is to share some funding to allow the provinces to fulfill their stewardship around their healthcare systems. But that doesn't mean they don't want to listen, or that they're giving us basically a stiff arm and saying, don't bother with us. They're still very much willing to engage and discuss the issues. So just think at one example, medical assistance in dying.
Right.
So that's an issue where the Bloc is more aligned with the NDP and the Conservatives compared to the Liberals. That will be an issue in terms of how will the Liberals get over the line in terms of amending the current legislation so that those with the sole underlying medical condition of mental illness can apply for Track 2.
And can you explain that a little bit to me? Like, tease out that issue. What are the positions there, and what is it that we're seeking to have happen down the line? I know that there's not, there's no consensus on this.
There's at least two consensus, if that's a word.
Consensi.
Consensi. And they're sharply different. The Liberal Party has put legislation in place, and it's now waiting to be promulgated, I believe, in 2026, where you have Track 1 and Track 2 in terms of applying. One is where there is terminal illness, Track 1. Track 2 is where there's a sole underlying medical condition, not necessarily terminal, but where someone who has had a tremendous number of treatments, for example, for a particular mental disorder, and is still of the view that nothing has happened. They are depressed, and they feel that they want to end their lives legally. Mm-hmm. And that's Track 2. And of course, there is a series of filters and assessments that an individual would have to go through before that event would actually occur. On the other side, you have the Conservatives, the Bloc Québécois, and the NDP that are saying they will not support that legislation. And in fact, they will repeal that particular element, i.e. Track 2, from the made legislation. So there are two different views of the world. And of course, just knowing where the numbers fall right now, and the Liberals are 4 votes short of a majority, the question is, how do you get from where they are to where they need to be?
Right. Yes. All right. I think you and I might define consensus differently. I don't think you can have 2 separate and diametrically opposed consensuses. Consensi. Also, I don't know what the word is. So immediately, in the immediate aftermath, what are the next steps that you and Dr. Vaudebleeker and Dr. Madden take in terms of approaching this new government and approaching the issues anew?
So there are a couple. Certainly, once cabinet is announced, we will be reaching out formally to congratulate each cabinet minister and look to arrange a meeting with that particular cabinet minister. And in the interim, we will collectively take a step back and see where the agendas lie vis-a-vis the Liberal Party and the other political parties, and figure out what our plan of action is in terms of how we actually want to engage and how we may want to frame our issues. So if you look at, for example, the CPA primer, that's on our website that we talked about in the first podcast, we tried to frame it in the context of having maximum impact. And now when you look at all 4 particular issues, in varying degrees they've been picked up, but not wholly in terms of each particular issue, which we offered to each political party by virtue of having in the public space and sharing with all MPs at the time,
right,
that they may want to pick up, digest, and then incorporate into their platform. That didn't happen, but that doesn't mean that that will stop us from raising the issues in the context of the current narrative. And the narrative, as we have talked about, is really the economic piece first, as I see it, and maybe I'm biased because I'm an economist, but that particular piece around affordability, jobs, tariffs, and trade is the lens through which I think we need to make sure that we make our case relevant to otherwise we run the risk of being seen as completely irrelevant to their current set of priorities. So I think that's part of our internal strategic thinking that's going on right now.
Right, and it doesn't look like those priorities are going to change anytime soon. That's going to be the central issue for some time, I imagine.
It is. And saying that, though, when you look at the Liberal platform, there's a number of different pieces that they identify in terms of where they want to go in terms of healthcare. So they talk about investing in primary care teams.
Right.
That's a real opportunity as we move forward in terms of the different delivery models of care that are emerging across this country and the role of psychology.
Right, and integrating psychologists into primary care teams and so on.
Precisely. So there may be some opportunities to do that. They're also talking about how we move to more of a national licensure, interprovincial regulation, so that once you have your license in one province, de facto it applies in every other province and you don't have to formally apply for your license.
Right.
So that's a piece where we would be supportive and certainly exploring the opportunities, knowing that physicians are already there and so are nurses. And when you look at the dialogue right now around lowering the barriers for interprovincial trade, this is very much part of it in terms of labor mobility. So that's an important issue that's on our minds. They also set aside $4 billion for infrastructure. And in the wording in the platform, they identify mental health services as part of that $4 billion. Now, $4 billion may sound like a lot. Keep in mind, we spend about $270 billion of public money every year in healthcare.
Right.
Aside from the private side, just on the public side. But nonetheless, the question is, okay, now that you have this pot of money over the next 4 or 5 years, where's the opportunity for mental health? And again, this is where I think we need more dialogue with the new government to figure out exactly what they mean, because the devil's in the details. That isn't fully described in the platform document.
Yes, and the word infrastructure sounds sort of ethereal to me in that I can't really picture what we're talking about, right? I hear infrastructure, I think bridges and roads and airports and so on. But I know it's also about the structure of the healthcare delivery system and so on. But yes, again, I suppose until that gets specified, it's sort of hard to know where that might go.
Yeah, no, exactly. So we just need to engage more. And then the other piece I wanted to identify was research. There's been a lot of discussion recently just because of the cuts to the National Institute of Health, the National Institutes of Mental Health in the United States. And are there opportunities for the best and brightest to come to Canada? And it's going to be really interesting to see, because there's been some nice words that the politicians have focused on in terms of the importance of research. But the way that I see the discussion right now, just reading through the platform documents, it isn't necessarily research tilted towards early stage or discovery-based research. Right now, the way I see it, the lens is more through, and not exclusively, but more through the research, innovation, commercialization realm. So, and again, it's all about how does research lead to new products and services that we can capture new markets, sell products to the rest of the world, drive revenue, create new jobs, and own the intellectual property. So it's that particular piece as I see it being framed. It's not, and again, I just want to say it's not to the exclusion of the critical piece around discovery-based research, but it just feels to me right now, knowing where we are, and we're trying to reinvent our world and basically grow a new economy, the knowledge-based economy, where new knowledge and the ownership of that new knowledge can generate tremendous economic rent for Canada.
Right. Right. And I when you talk about it that way, I guess I think of it in terms of sort of results-based research, that a certain result is what we're hoping to achieve by funding a certain type of research and that sort of thing. And I'm thinking back to some of the discussions that we've had on this podcast in the last 3 months or so, especially in the wake of the NIH pulling funding from so many research projects and so many, crucial and important global initiatives, that a lot of research that gets done that seems sort of frivolous and seems inconsequential ends up becoming really, really important down the road. And to sort of decide at the beginning, well, we're going to fund this type of research, but not this, for whatever reason, ends up missing out on some really incredible results. There was a study on the venom of Gila monsters, which made it into the top 10 stupid studies of 1998 or whatever. Well, that study ended up creating the drug Ozempic, some years down the road. And had that Gila monster venom study never been done, we wouldn't have this drug that's helping people with diabetes. So I guess it was, the article I read was in defense of silly sounding research, right?
Well, this is the beauty of discovery-based research. You don't know where it's going to end up. You don't know how it's going to be applied. And there is a randomness in the sense that even though we understand the importance of new knowledge and its discovery, what may become of it 30, 40 years down the road? Think stem cell research.
Yeah.
Being incredibly powerful now, but at that time, they didn't know necessarily what they had.
Right. Right. And now is the opportunity really to put some of that funding in place. But also, I think one of the things that I'm hearing a lot about is the barriers to entry into Canada for scientists, for professors, for researchers who may want to come here and do some of the work that they were doing previously in the U.S. or even elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think that if there is a challenge in that area, then it's a question of how do we figure out the funding to bring them and have the research infrastructures to support them. And so just as an example, look at what University Health Network is doing with their Canada Leads initiative that they announced about a week and a half ago, where they put $15 million on the table to be matched by their foundation, another $15 million, $30 million that they're putting on the table to hire a slew, and I say slew because I can't remember the number, of the best and brightest early career researchers.
Right.
So that's substantial. And UHN is one of the largest, if not the largest, health research player in the country, given their budgets. But that's a substantial step forward that they're taking. Very aggressive, very innovative, and kudos to them.
Well, let's hope that from this point on, most of the steps we take are steps forward. And one more important result that we have to discuss, which is the Habs series.
Yes.
What do you think going into the next couple of games in Washington?
Well, some of the listeners may not know, but I grew up in Montreal. I'm a born and bred Canadiens fan and have Habs blood in my veins, just given my familial relationship to the Canadiens. But I'm very hopeful. I mean, they played very well. Good to see that they won a game at home. They very much held their own. I'm hopeful they can at least get it to 6 games.
Yes.
And I say that because, they're the youngest team in NHL history to make the playoffs. So they are young and impressionable They're learning, and I think they have a great future that goes well beyond this year.
It is wild to think how young they are. I saw in the game, in Game 3, that the 3 players that combined for the goal and the 2 assists were the youngest in history since 1986 or something, when it was also 3. Shane Corson was one of them in the 80s. Only in sports do they make so. And then they also do this in politics, right? This is the first time that the 2 parties have more than 40% of the popular vote since 1930 in Canada. This, I don't know if that puts it into perspective for anybody, or if it's just something to fill the air when they need to fill the airtime. But
all I can say is go Habs, go. And I'm pulling hard for the Sens too, for all those Ottawa fans out there.
Yes,
they're doing a great job, and I'm hopeful that they can take on the Leafs.
I would love that as well. And as a longtime Sens fan, a fan since the first day that they became a team, I'm a little more defeatist, maybe, and cynical. And as we've said, we're taping this on Tuesday, right after the election, which means the next game is coming up tonight. And I am of the mind that it's likely that when our listeners pay attention and listen to this podcast, that the Leafs will be on to the second round. I'm defeatist, I think. Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me again.
This was terrific. Happy to do it. Look forward to doing that at a future date.
Excellent. We look forward to having you back, and thanks to you at home for listening, tuning in, streaming, downloading, and reviewing today's episode. As always, Mindful is hosted, published, and written by me, Eric Bowman. Our producer is Jamie Montgomery, and our theme music is Avenues by David Taylor.